these problems, like October 7th, are our own doing, and our refusal to clean up our own military and political establishments are the reason we're losing people. I have said before, and nobody objected to me, nobody contradicted me, that the greatest killer of Israeli soldiers is the high command, the Israeli high command. And I've never been contradicted on this point by anyone, either in uniform or civilians. Nobody has contradicted.
I would actually point to a different institution that I think is even more culpable, and that is the so-called Supreme Court.
Ultimately,
because the Supreme Court and other elements of the extreme left, the non-Jewish, self-hating left, they set the tone and establish the norms for those generals in the general staff to follow.
Correct.
They either are obligated because they themselves accept those norms and those ideas, or they feel they have no choice. Either way, for example, it was the Supreme Court that forced the army's hand not to maintain a buffer zone on the other side of the border fence with Gaza.
Correct.
The army did want 1 or 2 kilometer buffer zone or something, so precisely to prevent them overrunning the border fence and invading Israeli towns and cities. And it was the Supreme Court that
prevented that.
Said you have no legal basis to do that, and therefore that will not be the case. Similarly, we could mention in passing it's now almost 3 years, I believe, the disaster at Meon on Lag BaOmer, when 45 people were trampled to death at the Lag BaOmer celebrations in Meon in northern Israel. And just yesterday, the official Commission of Inquiry's report was released. And they found the prime minister and this minister and that minister and this police officer to be responsible. But they omitted to mention, surprise, surprise, that in fact, more responsible than anyone was the Supreme Court. Why? Because for about 25 years, 30 years, the state, not just a particular government, but the government apparatus understood that this was a disaster waiting to happen, quite literally. Everyone understood this. And the area of that place, which is supposed to be the burial place of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, although there's no proof of that. It's not very important, I don't think, either, practically speaking, or even spiritually speaking. But the place held to be his burial spot. There are buildings and certain areas and facilities around that area, around that piece of real estate, that are controlled and have been controlled for generations by certain Ottoman non-profit organizations, what are called in Hebrew as agudot Ottomaniot, and all kinds of hekdeshim, in other words, land and buildings that were dedicated to a religious purpose, that are non-profit organizations and are essentially autonomous. But as I say, the government and various governments going back many years understood there was a serious problem here, and really the land and the buildings need to be confiscated and need to be put under the control of one national authority to deal with various religious sites, including that site, and do what needs to be done in order to ensure that such a tragedy did not take place. The government, several successive governments, tried to do so. They announced and according to the law, they have every right. The Ministry of Finance has the official authority to to confiscate or to take over certain territories.
Eminent domain. They can.
Exactly. And this is in the law, and has been used it has been cited in a number of cases where it was necessary. And they wanted to do the same with Meron. And the various religious organizations and Ottoman non-profit institutions challenged that, went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said to the government, you cannot confiscate, you cannot take over these lands, these properties, this area, because it belongs to these groups. So the government was prevented from doing anything about it by the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court is not mentioned in the Commission's report.
At all.
Of course not. Because first of all, the people who were on that commission were appointed by the deep state, and very often they're cronies and friends and colleagues. The people
they cover for one another,
and by definition, in their worldview, progressive judges can do no wrong. They cannot be mistaken.
Correct. And basically, you can take that same analysis and apply it to the military perfectly. The same thing. And this is why I am not optimistic that the Commission of Inquiry with regard to October 7th will really identify the actual causes of that debacle. Just as this Commission of Inquiry on Meron I read the report myself, and it was unsatisfactory because it didn't get at the heart of the problem, which was, why couldn't this area be expanded to lessen the pressure of all these crowds coming? Well, I think the same thing is going to happen with this Commission of Inquiry. The actual causes of October 7th are going to be glossed over and kind of swept under the rug. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I...
Particularly if there is truth in what you yourself suggested in our last conversation, and many others have been expressing these views. In fact, it's people that actually I'm surprised would have said these things, but they have. Initially, at the beginning of the war, there were a few people saying these things, but now more and more people are beginning to wonder if there wasn't, in fact, some kind of conspiracy.
At some level,
as part of a anti-Netanyahu campaign to bring Netanyahu down.
At some level, I'm coming around to this position. It's just too many mistakes that were, quote, mistakes that were made that can't be explained by any other explanation. There are too many things that just don't make any sense unless there was an attempt to allow something to happen in order to embarrass Netanyahu and hopefully bring down his government. We'll see.
And keep in mind that certain people on the part of the Israeli left, deep state, anti-Netanyahu, anti-judicial reform, etc. I'm referring specifically right now to Shikma Breslev. She announced a year ago that come September, talking about last year, you will have no intelligence service,
no army,
military,
and no army.
And interestingly, the next month, October, that seems to be what happened. So if it was somehow coordinated or not is something which certainly needs to be investigated, and I do not believe that these things will in fact be investigated.
Bearing in mind that coincidence is not causality, I believe that the left was deeply involved in precipitating Hamas's decision to invade. I was sending things to certain people that showed what was happening in Israel, particularly with regard to the army, the perceived impression that the army was incapable of fighting because of political fissures that had opened up over the judicial reform program, and what Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran was saying. The last report I sent in to people, which was from October, I think it was 5th or 4th, was a video of a massive military parade in Gaza of Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas, both. I'd never seen weaponry like that before. I mean, they really brought out everything. And at the end, there was this thing in Arabic that appeared slowly as if through the mist. And then the translation, which was soon. And I tried to correlate where all the attacks on the fence line had occurred and where they were trying to blow holes in the fence, and where these Palestinians had cut through the fence without any of the sensors going off, and were just standing there on our side, waiting to they were timing the response. They weren't going for, falafels in Beersheba. They were waiting. They just stood there. And I identified all these locations along the border where the Palestinians had either tried to blow holes in our fence line, or had actually penetrated and just stood there waiting for a response. And many of the places where they crossed coincided with those areas that I had circled in red. If I could do something like that at home, somebody like Haliwa, Major General Haliwa, what was his objective? Whose cause was he actually serving? What kind of result did he expect from his calculated effort to blind our indications and warning teams about the fact that something was going to happen? They had all the information at their disposal. They had it all. Why did they not alert Bibi's military advisor? That's simple enough. They're coming out now with a story that, well, one of the guys in the intelligence field, came up with the conclusion that war was coming. Well, why didn't somebody pick up the phone and call Bibi's military aid? Why didn't they do that? And I believe that there could be only one explanation for that, and that is this effort to undermine, embarrass, and ultimately overthrow our democratically elected government by a calculated military embarrassment on the frontier. The problem was it just got out of hand.
Again, we are discussing a fifth column.
Correct.
That views Jews who are committed to their Jewish identity and their Jewish traditions as the worst possible enemy and threat to their picture, their vision of Israel.
But why? I ask you, if I agree, but there's something else at work here. Why did the army go about disarming many of the community security teams along the Gaza envelope, most of which were secular, Chiloni? They weren't national religious. They weren't,
that for example, is a question that would have to be and should be explored and investigated by such a commission of inquiry, which unfortunately I cannot tell you that I believe
I have no faith
will be done. I do not think so.